Today's date is March 3rd, 1994. I'm Blake Hailey, and we're making this videotape at the University of North Texas Health Science Center in Fort Worth, and at the Gibson D. Lewis Library in the Biomed Communications Center. And we have the pleasure today of talking with Mr. J. Sandelin, the chairman of the board of the Osteopathic Medical Center of Texas. Now, after going through all of that long introduction, I'd like to ask you some questions. Perhaps we go back to your prior background and what led you into the osteopathic profession and the medical center.
Well, do you want the real story, or which story do you want, Blake?
Well, the real story, unless the fake one is far more interesting.
No, I don't know how interesting either one of them are. I used to live over in Medford Court, and I was in my backyard one day, and there were some weeds coming over the back fence. And I didn't know my neighbor very well, so I got a ladder and I looked over the fence. There was a guy by the name of Joel Alter, who was an osteopathic physician, and he was weeding his garden and throwing the weeds over the fence into my yard. So we became friends after that, and that's one of the connections I had with the school. The other one was that I was working at Fort Worth National Bank, and at the time that Dr. Everett and Dr. Lubel were starting the school, and I used to monitor the size of the bank accounts, and I noticed this one account was getting larger and larger and larger, and it was under the name of Carl Everett, trustee. So I called on Dr. Everett to find out what was going on, and that was the money that they were raising to put together a fund to start the school. So that was some of the beginnings of my relationship with it. Then after the school was started, I believe back in 1971, I was one of the members of the board when the school was a private institution before it became part of the university system.
What were some of the things you did while you served on the board at that point? You were still in banking till, for a number of years after that.
Yeah.
So what were some of the things you did on the board?
Well, we originally, of course, started, the school then at that point was located in Tavener's building, which of course was nobody likes to talk about it, but that was the origination of it, was the bowling lanes. Some people even called it alley then, but the people that were uptown then called bowling alleys bowling lanes, and that's where the school was originally at that time. And of course Dr. Henry Hart, I believe it was the first president, and then I believe it was Marion Coy after that. And both of those gentlemen, of course, were there during the time that I was on the board.
So you witnessed when they merged with the was in North Texas State University, all these name changes.
Like the banks.
Yes, exactly. So how were things going at that point with the North Texas people? Were you involved heavily in that?
No, as a board member, no. We just, we met on a monthly basis and reviewed what was going on, but and we were aware of what was going on. There was an arrangement at that point with North Texas, and I believe the first, 2 years, they traveled up to Denton, and it was a good relationship. It worked out very well. And then, of course, when the school was able to get the money to evolve, they moved most of that back up here. But that went on for a period, I guess, of 7 or 8 years, something like that.
That's kind of what I'm thinking from what I read myself.
Right.
Then you stayed with the bank till '84, and then, or in banking till what, '89, really? Yeah,
I left the Fort Worth National at one point. Was it '84? I guess it was. And I started my own bank, or started a bank with a group of investors, and that bank eventually closed. I might say along with a lot of others.
Well, yeah, what bank hasn't closed or changed?
Well, there are a few that haven't. Some made it, but for the most part, and that was in '89, I believe, when I came to work on a full-time basis at the hospital.
Now, who got you interested in that? I mean,
well, I had originally been on the board, of course, of the college for a long time. Then when it became a state institution, there wasn't a position because the Board of Regents were the board at that point, the Board of Regents of North Texas, and so we had an advisory board of which I was chairman for several years, and so my original association with the osteopathic community was through the college, and then at that point I met some people, of course, from the hospital, and at some point I went on the board of the hospital as well.
And I take it by that you do a lot of traveling and that type of thing, from what I've gathered.
Not much.
What are some of the things you do on the board there? What are some of your responsibilities?
Well, if I told you, I might lose my job. Because they'd find out I didn't have much to do.
Oh.
Well, general long-range planning, all the things that a chief executive officer does of an organization. Since I've been there, we have expanded somewhat our thinking about what the future holds, and we're now involved a great deal in developing some clinics, rural clinics, some of them. We're even talking to some people as far out as Jacksboro, Texas, and so forth, to strengthen our outreach, our catchment area, if you will. A couple of years ago, actually I think it was probably in '89 maybe, we changed the name of the hospital from Fort Worth Osteopathic Medical Center to Osteopathic Medical Center of Texas, and it wasn't just so all the letters were the same as TCOM, only in different orders. It was because we really wanted to position ourselves as the largest osteopathic hospital in the state of Texas to perhaps pick up patients from outside our own area, and so that was the reason that we changed the name. There was some forethought into it, and that's worked out to some extent.
What are some other long range? You mentioned the clinics and possibly going to Jacksboro. What are some other long range plans that you have for the hospital or you'd like to see achieved?
Mainly, I think we need to strengthen the clinics, the family practice clinics, because that, I think, is the osteopathic strength, is the family practitioner, and that is the basis of the feeder system, if you will, to of course, our ultimate goal is to stay alive financially and keep the hospital going and support the osteopathic profession. But I think we can do that through having the family clinics. We now have, I think, 7 of those.
That's a good number. How many beds are in the hospital?
265. However, that used to be when there were certificates of need, and they had so many licensed beds. In reality, I think we probably have about 210 beds that we fill.
And that makes us one of the largest, or the largest in Texas?
Well, it's the largest osteopathic hospital in Texas.
Right. How has the relationship been between TCOM and now the Health Science Center and the hospital been over the years since you've been there, or even if you know before you came along?
Well, I have always thought the relationship has been good. There are others that think it's horrible. There are others that think it's okay. There are other people that struggle with it every day. I've always thought it's been good. Of course, the hospital, the 5th floor of the hospital is where the school started. And I've always thought the relationship's been relatively good. You always have I think the built-in competitiveness, perhaps, Blake, of some of the physicians. There are some in private practice. There are some that work for the school. But for the most part, I think it's been good. Years ago, I was chairman of the liaison committee that was between the hospital and the school, and Roy Fisher at that point was very active. And if there was a problem, I'd call Roy and I'd say, "Now, Roy, don't you think maybe we ought to get together?" And he'd say, "Oh, let's not. Let's just wait. Let's just wait and see." And sure enough, the problems would eventually evolve or resolve themselves, and they'd go away. So I think there's always the potential for conflict. And now the profession's changed enough because of the lack of positions for residents and interns. It's caused some additional pressure, I think. The osteopathic hospitals are dwindling very quickly.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that.
And probably where they're probably at some point were like 20 in the state, they're probably down to 3 or 4 that are really osteopathic to any extent. And I think that's caused pressure on the school to have to find other places for the students to go to get their training. Also, one of the criticisms of osteopathic medicine in the past has been the fact that probably their residency programs might not have been as strong as allopathic residency programs. And I think in order to meet that criticism, it's been necessary to develop other programs, a lot of them with allopathic institutions, which we understand. We're so small relative to the needs of the school that we can fulfill part of the needs, but of course we can't do all of it because we don't have the scope and volume of patients that for a good background for the interns at all times.
So where do you see the medical center and the relationship with the health science center going? What things would you like to see done between the two institutions and working together?
Oh, I think it's probably, Blake, like a marriage. It has to be worked at every day. No marriage is perfect. I always give out the analogy that we're Catholic and the Pope's won't give us a divorce, so we might as well stop worrying about that, and we just worry about trying to get along the best way we can. We have some projects that we're doing together, and I think as time goes on with the changes in medicine that we'll probably in some ways become closer. The Hyperbaric medicine program, which was started over here, of course, on this side of Montgomery, if you want to draw lines along streets, we began to be involved with because it simply wasn't possible to treat some of the patients that the Hyperbaric program got in the school in a non-clinical setting. And so at some point several years ago, Dr. Richards asked if we could make space for one of the units in the hospital, and we did that, and I think that was probably the genesis of the Hyperbaric program. And then, of course, recently we installed the new Hyperbaric medicine chamber, which seats, I believe, 12 people.
Oh my.
And so gone from the single unit chamber to the 12, and we do this in conjunction. We would never have done this, of course, without the school, and the professors and so forth that run that come from the school. Dr. Mills, Dr. Slocum, and Dr. Wilson and others have been with the school. But it is, we consider it to be a joint program and probably a good example of cooperation between the two institutions.
Do you have some other programs you'd like to see advanced, or do you have some other thoughts of your own you'd like to see tried in the next few years between the two institutions, off the top of your head?
I can't think of anything specifically. We've talked in the past about trying to maybe even have some clinics that would have private side or individuals in private practice in the same clinic with someone from the school, and I don't think in the day of computerization that's unrealistic to think about that. We have no obstetricians at all that are private. All of them are with the school, which has been a fine relationship for us, and it's worked very well. So should we ever have a private obstetrician, I would hope that at some point they could practice with the other people, but we haven't recruited one and don't intend to.
So it sounds like then the marriage, as you say, is going pretty well. Of course, like you say, there's always some people that maybe wish the marriage hadn't happened and look at Montgomery as a dividing line, but it sounds like things are in pretty good shape.
Well, I don't think there's any question but what the hospital would not have progressed to the extent it has without the school, and to some extent vice versa. I think the two together make a very strong unit. There's a great deal of there are people that say, well, we need to do this separately or that separately, but I think our strength lies in doing as much as we can together, and we can't do everything together. I mean, it just can't possibly work, but we can cooperate where we can. I do think that there's a lot of angst among some people about worrying about the fact that the community doesn't understand who's who and what's what, but I gave up years ago trying to explain to people the difference because it makes no difference. I get mail addressed to me at Texas College of Osteopathic Medicine, and I'm sure Dr. Richards has people that think he works at the hospital, and you can worry about that, but the community really doesn't mind. It's kind of like the sex of a hippopotamus. Only another hippopotamus cares. I mean,
right.
it makes no difference. I know that people have asked me in the past, and I've tried to explain it and taken several minutes to do so, and in many instances they've said, oh, well, it's the same thing then. And there is since we are so much together and there's so much interweaving of the fabric that to most people it doesn't make any difference.
I noticed in my encounters with people, when I tell them what I'm doing, they often, the Health Science Center, they see is TCOM, and that's all they're ever going to see. And you probably guess it doesn't really matter in a sense. People are going in the community are going to think what they want, and as long as the DO knows the difference, and that's all that matters.
Well, yeah, I guess I was at lunch the other day, and I saw a guy by the name of George Pepper, who's been around the community a long time, and you'd think would know the difference. And he says, well, I see you finally got all your signs changed. And instead of saying, no, George, you know, I don't work, you know, I just said, oh, yeah, that's right. Because they don't care, you know. They really don't care. Terry Ryan, that your mother knows very well, of course, at the Chamber of Commerce, I've explained it to Terry. I know that Dr. Richards has explained it to Terry no less than 5 times. Mike Davenport, who came from the Chamber, has explained it to Terry, and he still doesn't understand the difference. I went to a Chamber meeting the other day, and they had my name tag up, and it said, University of North Texas Health Science Center. And so I took it to Terry, and I said, now, Terry, and he said, we've got the E in there, because people leave the E out of my name. He says, no, your name's spelled right, we got the E in there. And I said, no, that's not what it's about. I said, you know, he said, well, you don't, what do you want to go by, TCOM, you know, instead of University of North Texas? And I said, no, I said, I'll talk to you about it later. But they don't understand, and I don't think it makes a lot of difference to the community. To the community, for the most part, we're looked upon as one institution. That's why it's so, I think, important that we do cooperate where we can and know what the other one's doing. So, because if one does something, it reflects on the other, and vice versa. And of course, in many measures, probably 35, 40, maybe even higher than that of the admissions to the hospital are from the physicians at the school. So we are the same in many instances.
It's a win-win situation.
Well, it can be. It certainly can be.
Let me ask you this. How do you see the UNT Health Science Center in your background? How do you see it being different from other medical centers in Texas? And what do you think it really has to offer this area and the state in general? You mentioned the primary care physicians. Are there other things that come to mind?
Well, I think the public health school program can be very beneficial, but I don't really know a lot about the other centers. I do know that it was absolutely necessary, from my conversation with Dr. Richards, and I believe he was right, to change the name. There was some resistance to that, but I do think that nationally that you absolutely have to have that name in order to get the respect and the grants and the funds that go along with research. You have to be a health science center. I agree with that totally. I do think where the osteopathic physician is concerned, I think we're 80% family practice to 20% or somewhere like that, and where the allopathic profession is the other way around. And I do think it's important, especially if you read the newspapers, to see that we really are the basis of what the national health care plan can look like, in that we have a predominance of family practitioners who I do think in large measure can take care of the patient at a lower cost than if they immediately get in the specialist loop and referral loop. Now, I think what has to happen, though, probably is the way the payment system works. We'll have to go to a capitated system in order to get the physician to change his practice habits at some point. And there's a lot of resistance to this. A lot of physicians think this is bad medicine, and this is going to create a lot of problems, and it will create a lot of changes in the system. There's no question about that.
I guess people then are reluctant to change, but then some people, you don't want to have to stay the same either, so.
Well, I think change is probably essential, and it happens very normally, but in this case, due to the pressure from the national government, federal government, and the other plans, I think probably it's evolving quicker than it would have, but I think change is necessary. And whether or not 15% or 16% or even up to 20% of gross national product to be spent on medical care is too high a number, I don't know. I mean, who's to say it is? You know, the government doesn't mandate spending caps on other things, but they're very concerned about health care. To me, and this is probably heresy, political heresy, but I think it was a given that as soon as the defense budget went down, that the government would stay involved somehow in the other big expenditures in health care. And it was just natural that they would keep that pool of money, in my estimation. And I don't think I'm being cynical. I think that's a realistic viewpoint.
We've covered a lot of things here. I have one more question I do want to ask you, but I want to see if there's any things that you'd like to bring up that I haven't asked you or you haven't already mentioned that you can think of off the top of your head.
I've probably editorialized on the things I want to enough. I don't.
I do have to agree with you. The name change. It sounds like to me, from what studies that I've done, that it was a a logical step and a smart step for TCOM to make and bring a lot to the school and to the hospital as well. My one question I have for you, now that, of course, you have made some changes in the past few years, sounds like in the hospital, how do you see your role as the chairman changing in the next few years? Or is it going to stay pretty much like it has?
Well, I don't know because I'm not sure what my role has been, but primarily what I see as my charge is to try to the best of my ability to look out as far as you possibly can into the future and position our institutions so that we can survive. I mean, it's to that. There are a lot of hospitals that they say will close in the next several years, and we don't want to be one of those. We want to still be there 5, 6 years from now, and I think that will be a struggle. That's why everybody gets so very concerned, either personally about healthcare or institutionally about healthcare, because it affects all of our lives very much. And so I think it is a hot topic, and whether or not the President's healthcare plan will pass in the way in which he has formulated it or not remains to be seen. Most people feel it will not look at all like it, nor, in my opinion, should it look like what he's formulated. But you can't really offer less health care for more money, which is what they basically said they're going to do, and think people are going to be thrilled about the prospect.
So you do see a health care change in some form down the way?
Oh, there's no question there'll be a change. There are already changes taking effect as people position themselves for the future. And I think that's good. That's evolutionary, and that's very good.
You think the hospital and the school are on good, sounds like on the cutting edge to make these changes without too much trouble, since there are young institutions relatively?
I think so. I think you always need to make adjustments in what you do, but again, I think what osteopathic medicine has is what the healthcare needs to look like, and that is a predominance of family practitioners.
Do you have any closing remarks that you'd like to make?
No, I've probably talked too much now, Blake.
You definitely have made some good and valuable remarks, I know, for this interview, and I do appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to meet with us. And I know you have a lot of things you're involved in and working on in the community, and we do appreciate you taking your valuable time to meet with us, and hope we didn't ask you too many tough to answer questions. And thanks again.
Okay, well, thank you.
And with that, we'll conclude this interview. Thank you, and have a nice day.